One of the most divisive issues in the recent years revolves around Confederate remembrance through flags and statues. Each side is passionate about their cause, which can sometimes result in violent clashes, as seen in Charlottesville, Virginia earlier this year. Following the violence, many states have moved to remove these monuments, drawing praise from one side and condemnation from the other. Those who argue against the removal of Confederate symbols say that the flags and statues represent Southern pride and are an important part of our history. They also question why these statues must be removed when statues of Washington and Jefferson, both slave owners, are allowed to stay. On the opposing side of the issue, those who argue for the removal of the monuments say that they are racist and have become symbols of white supremacy. Those who argue against the removal of Confederate flags and monuments believe that they are symbols of Southern pride, not symbols of racism. In a poll from CNN Politics, 66% of white respondents said that the flag was a symbol of Southern pride, while only 17% of black respondents agreed. In Santa Barbara de Oeste, Brazil, a town that has the descendants of Southerners who moved to Brazil after the Civil War, the Confederate flag is seen as a symbol of love, not as a symbol of racism.
Because the flag here has different meaning.
What does the flag mean to him?
É símbolo de amor para mim.
Pick up the flag and put in a museum. Okay, there are no problem at all. And you see that the conflict is going to continue. So the problem is not the flag. The problem is in the people mindset.
In popular culture, the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard features a car named the General Lee and adorned with the Confederate flag. Its owners are portrayed as the good guys with family pride who take on the establishment.
Just a good old boy. They wouldn't change if they could. They're fighting that system like a two modern-day Robin Hoods.
The band Lynyrd Skynyrd flew the Confederate flag at its shows as a symbol of their Southern heritage and pride. In reference to the flag's connection to the Civil War, they say that the Civil War was simply fought over states' rights. Those who believe that these monuments should not be removed also argue that these monuments are a part of our history and should not be erased. According to a Reuters poll from August 2017, 54% of adults say that Confederate monuments should remain in all public spaces.
What hasn't been resolved is because the public is not for doing this. Only a small minority, only about a quarter of people polled yesterday in the United States thought that these monuments should come down. Over 60% said they should remain as historical remnants of an earlier age. So, you need to get the public on board before you do this.
They believe that the country shouldn't allow its citizens to only be exposed to one point of view. If our citizens are only exposed to the ideologies of one group, how can they be expected to learn and grow? Lastly, they wonder about how far the removal will go. They argue that if statues of Confederate generals are being removed, why shouldn't we remove statues of former presidents?
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, are we going to take down his statue?
They think that if we remove the Confederate monuments, we will go too far to remove other monuments that some people might find offensive.
Okay. Well, the city I live in is named after the founder of the country, the first president, whose plantation, which was populated by slaves, is right down the road at Mount Vernon. So, this is not a rhetorical question. That's a real question. Should we change the name of the capital of the country?
Those who argue against the removal of the monuments say that they are symbols of racism. In a poll from CNN Politics, 72% of black respondents said that they view the Confederate flag as a symbol of racism, while only 25% of white respondents agreed. Interestingly, many of the monuments were not put up after the Civil War when you would expect, but were actually put up between 1895 and World War I during the Jim Crow era, a time of oppression for African Americans. So, this side argues that the statues have no value in remembering the Confederacy, but instead were put up to oppress African Americans and served to justify slavery, the reason the Confederacy went to war in the first place. Additionally, there are at least 8 states that were Union states or did not exist during the Civil War that have Confederate monuments. Why would these states want to have Confederate monuments if they did not support the Confederacy and even fought against it? This side also argues that the monuments go beyond racism and oppression and have become associated with the white supremacy movement. The Charlottesville protests that resulted in the death of Heather Heyer occurred when white nationalists in a Unite the Right rally that were protesting the removal of a Robert E. Lee statue clashed with counter-protesters. Another tie to white supremacy occurred when protesters at the rally shouted Dylann Roof was a hero. In 2015, Roof killed 9 African Americans in Charleston, South Carolina. Many of his personal pictures featured him with the Confederate flag and other symbols of white supremacy. Dr. Matthew McAllister, a communications professor at Penn State University, believes that the statues should be taken down because the flag and statues are now seen as reinforcing white supremacy. He says that they are post-Civil War displays constructed during eras like the Jim Crow era, triggered by anti-black sentiment and meant to reassert white racial superiority. Because each side has such strong views on the subject, it would be hard to find a solution that would appeal to both sides. The issue is very polarized, with whites and Republicans supporting keeping the monuments, and minorities and Democrats in favor of removing them, according to a Reuters poll. As the United States becomes increasingly polarized, especially when it comes to politics, it may be difficult to get both sides to compromise on a solution. In Russia, statues of Lenin were removed from public areas and placed in a museum sculpture garden. Perhaps we could remove the Confederate statues and place them in museums. That way, they would not be destroyed, and people would still have the opportunity to learn about these figures, but they would not be out in public places as constant reminders of racist or supremacist ideals. Dr. McAllister suggests that it's up to local museums then to contextualize the statue's history for that particular location.